DataOps is really not only a set of software, but also a set of business processes and a collection of expertise that enables organizations and empowers chief data officers to deliver more analytic and operational velocity using data across their entire business.
Welcome to DataMasters. I'm Anthony Dayton, Chief Product Officer at Tamr. Today I'm joined by Andy Palmer. Andy is a serial entrepreneur. He's helped found or fund more than 50 companies, including Vertica, a pioneer in database management. He's currently serving as CEO of Tamr, a data mastering platform that uses machine learning to do the heavy lifting around consolidating, cleansing, and categorizing data. Andy's approach to data mastering involves the concept of DataOps, a concept that's emerged in recent years and shares traits with Devops. We're going to talk about DataOps and why it was developed, what its connection is to DevOps, and how DataOps benefits organization. Andy, thank you for joining us today, and welcome to DataMasters.
Thanks, Anthony. Great to be here.
So, Andy, maybe we could start with you sharing a bit about your professional experience and the connection to data and how organizations make value out of data.
Yeah, I started working in AI back in the 1980s, and as my good friend Marvin Minsky used to say, there are these two things that really matter in AI systems. One is having enough great data to make an algorithm useful, and the other one is the human and the machine kind of working closely together. And so for me, data has always been sort of front and center in all the systems that I've built, and the separation between data and software, I think, is kind of an artificial separation. And as we all experience on the modern web every single day, the software that makes up the modern World Wide Web would be, mostly meaningless without the data that's sort of intricately woven into all the applications that we use as consumers on the modern internet. So data is part of the lifeblood, part of the fuel that serves the modern consumer internet. And increasingly, large companies are starting to realize that data is the fuel for the next few decades, that it's a precious strategic asset that for the most part has been underappreciated and undermanaged.
You've often talked about this idea of being both the CEO of a company that's building DataOps software, but also you've been a customer of this software in your professional experience. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, when I was the chief information officer at a biotech startup called Infinity Pharmaceuticals, and then went on to run data and software engineering over at Novartis' research group. And in both of those experiences, working in modern biopharmaceutical drug development and discovery, it was clear to me that data was the core strategic asset that was driving the ability of those organizations to discover new drugs that made a difference in the lives of patients. And managing that data strategically became an imperative both at Infinity and at Novartis. And Vas, who's the CEO of Novartis now, talks about this on a regular basis, that data and analytics is a kind of a core capability of the next-gen modern enterprise, not only in biopharmaceuticals, but really, across the board for all industries across the Global 2000.
So would it be fair to say, and I think this is a theme that's come up in the Data Masters podcast, would it be fair to say that in a way every business is a data business? Like there's no longer solely building your competitive advantage on your manufacturing facilities or on your scientific accomplishments or on some piece of infrastructure that you have. That at its core, every business needs to build a data capability.
Yeah, and I don't think this is any different than the Industrial Revolution, where back then every business had to integrate power and energy into the fabric of who they were as a company. We're at the same sort of a transition now, where every business across the planet many are integrating data as a part of their core business. Many of them put it in context of their digital transformation, quote unquote. But oftentimes those digital transformations really do start with the management of their data as a core strategic asset and a primary driver with how they're going to serve their customers, whether those are B2B or B2C customers over the coming decades. That those digital experiences are all based on that company's ability to manage data as a strategic asset and apply it every single day in how they operate, as well as the strategic decisions that they make.
Got it. So like really thinking about data as a core asset. So you have your buildings and your goodwill and your ad brand and your customer relationships and your data. And then building from that, if we think about data as a core asset, organizations have invested a lot of thought in how they manage their people, how they manage their physical assets, et cetera. And they haven't invested as much energy in thinking about how to manage these data assets. And that's where you've come up with this concept of DataOps. And maybe you could share a little bit about just the concept of DataOps at a high level, and then we can drill into a bit of detail.
You bet. And this is no different than, the last 30 years where large companies had to figure out how they were going to integrate software into the core of what they do, and the evolution of their IT organizations and the emergence of the chief information officer as a key executive role. Now we're kind of going to the next level, and the emergence of the chief data officer is a reflection of this importance of data as a strategic asset in the company. And DataOps is really not only a set of software, but also a set of business processes and a collection of expertise that enables organizations and empowers chief data officers to deliver more analytic and operational velocity using data across their entire business. And the reference in DataOps is very specifically to DevOps. So DevOps evolved in the software industry over the last 20 plus years as a primary method for the big internet companies to increase feature velocity so that they could compete on the open internet and consumer internet. DataOps is really doing a very similar thing for the large enterprise, but the goal is to increase this operational and analytic velocity and decision-making velocity for large enterprise. And it really all does start with managing data as a strategic asset and building out the data pipelines required in order to serve that data to many different consumers inside of a large company with tremendous confidence that the quality and the veracity of that data is very, very high and reflects who their customers are, what their customers buy from them every day, who their suppliers are, what they buy from their suppliers, who their employees are, and what their employees are working on. Some of these very basic questions are almost unanswerable in many modern enterprises because of the complexity of their organizational structures and the idiosyncrasy of all the systems that we've automated over the last 20 or 30 years. And so a huge part of DataOps is bringing all that data together, aligning it using machine-driven, human-guided approaches so that you can answer some of these very simple, basic questions that serve as the foundation for much more complex analytics downstream as businesses get more and more data-driven.
So I think it's very interesting, this connection between sort of feature velocity and how you compete at sort of internet speed as a core driver for the introduction of DevOps and really tightening that loop between what you deploy to your production systems and what you develop from a software perspective, and create that same idea and concept in the connection between your data and then how that data is actually consumed through the analytical or operational outcomes that you're hoping to achieve. Is that a fair articulation of that connection?
Yeah, very well said. And, this idea that your data, just like your software with DevOps, is continuously built, tested, and released, that it's not a static thing, right? People used to think of software as like a product, a static product. It's really not like that. Software is ideally implemented and delivered as a service, and DevOps was kind of all about that. Same thing with data and DataOps, that the best way to think about data as a strategic asset, to view it as a continuously changing thing. It's constantly sort of prone to entropy. It's constantly prone to degrade. My partner Mike Stonebreaker likes to use the term database decay. And so the infrastructure that you put in place has to sort of recognize the physics of data and the realities that it does decay over time. You have to constantly be working to shape the data into the best form you can possibly deliver for end users. And the quality of that data really is what determines the quality of the decisions that a lot of people are making on the front lines of your business every day.
So I think those are some important connections between this idea of DevOps and DataOps. There's also an important organizational impact. When we think about DevOps from a software engineering perspective, we also think about the agile development methodology and really thinking about using feedback in a very tight loop between what feedback you get from customers, what features you're delivering, and how you guide and shift your development processes. Is there a similar sort of linkage or analogy between this DevOps and Agile and DataOps and Agile?
Absolutely. And, modern DataOps, what you really need is a closed loop system where you're collecting feedback directly from the consumers of data on a regular basis about what's good and what's bad, what's good and what's not. We have a component of our system at Tamr called Data Steward, which provides the function that lets you aggregate that feedback. I like to call it Jira for data. But in many organizations, this function doesn't exist. There's no place for people to go to say that this data is good or bad. And it's very similar to the feedback function that people are used to using in modern mobile apps, where if they don't like something, they have a way to review and register and provide input as to what's wrong and what's not working. We need the same function inside the enterprise for data, where you have this bi-directional flow of feedback that's constantly coming in from users that helps guide and shape the data as it's being systematically prepared for consumers so that it improves over time. Again, I'm an old AI guy, and so it's an active learning system at its best, where you automate a tremendous amount of that feedback and the implementation of that feedback into changes with how the data is prepared for people over time. But it's hard to do. And like you said, it's an organizational challenge. A lot of modern companies just are not set up organizationally to do this. But this is how we spend a lot of our time at Tamr, is partnering with the biggest companies in the world to help them manage their data as a strategic asset and implement these bi-directional flows of feedback throughout their organization.
So let's pull on that thread for a second. In the in the regular economy, we talk about the digital native organization built from the ground up, a modern organization. As we think about data ops, is this something that's only relevant for startups that are just starting out and they can build a from scratch data infrastructure and be a data driven organization, or is this relevant even for large enterprises? And how do we think about that distinction?
Yeah, I think it's even more relevant for large enterprises, and because oftentimes they have more valuable data than anyone else. The average startup, is just getting off the ground and probably hasn't had the time to build up some core asset of data. It's one of the big ironies of data ops is many of these large companies are sitting on treasure troves of unbelievable data, but it's not being managed or prosecuted very proactively. And one of the human behaviors that we struggle with a lot when we're working with our customers are these sort of core behaviors around data hoarding, where the people that own the data or run the databases are sort of got their arms around the data, and they view it as a method to promote their own careers, or they're just worried that people are going to get a look under the covers and not think the data is clean enough. And so, on the modern internet, data kind of wants to be free, and sooner or later, it almost always is. And so inside the enterprise, a lot of these behaviors around drawing boundaries around data that really resulted in what a lot of people today call data silos is really limited the amount of opportunity that large enterprises have had to prosecute their data as a strategic asset.
Yeah, I love this idea that silos of data coming out of an organization reflect the organizational silos, this kind of data hoarding. So like, if I can keep my data private to me, there's a principle in software engineering called Conway's Law that says that the structure of the software reflects the organization that built it. And I wonder if we see actually a similar point here, which is that by breaking down these silos, by providing a mechanism for breaking down these silos, we're also, in a sense, lubricating the organization, allowing the organization to operate more efficiently.
I think that's dead on, and I think we should coin the term right now: Dayton's Law.
That's that's very fair. I'll take it. So beyond just making the organization work more effectively and efficiently, from your perspective, as we help organizations build a data ops culture, what are some of the other benefits that organizations could expect to accrue with that investment?
Well, there's these core things that, if you have really good, clean data, there's core behaviors that start to change inside of an enterprise. We have a lot of customers where when we first started working with them, they had misconceptions about how big or small their customer base was, what the distribution of customers looked like in terms of their size, some of them really massively out of sync with reality. And so when you become data-driven as an organization, you seek to understand the truth, and you seek to understand the sort of validated view of the truth. And we see those kinds of companies getting better and better in terms of their strategic decision making. That it's almost like many of the functions that large companies have outsourced to the consulting firms like McKinsey or Bain or BCG for years are all of a sudden now, if they get their sort of data feet underneath them and they have some new next-gen analytic capability, they're like, well, why can't we, sort of own and drive a lot of those things that we used to rely on Bain and BCG and McKinsey to do? And I think it's a very healthy thing for these big companies because it sort of gives them ownership and control of the data itself and how the decisions are made, and sort of minimizes the amount of frivolous consulting expenses that they have to pay. But more importantly, probably empowers the people running those businesses to control their own destiny a lot more, and to not spend a lot of time with outsiders who are recently minted liberal arts grads to try and tell them how to run their business just because they can't get their hands on the data.
I think that's a really interesting idea. So I think we might think that the connection for data ops is really about, adding more revenue streams and, decreasing costs for mastering data and those sorts of things. But your point is, no, there's a direct connection between data ops and corporate strategy. That if you could actually create a data ops culture in your organization, in a way what you're creating is a responsive organization, one that can sense and understand signal from the market, from your customers, from your suppliers, from all of that inbound data, and then react and respond appropriately. So you're actually creating strategic leverage in the business.
Yeah, exactly. Big time. And oftentimes our customers get a little frustrated or confused because oftentimes the way you implement your first data ops projects and is in context of either something that's going to save you money, oftentimes by doing spend optimization, help you grow faster by doing cross-selling or upselling, or reduce risk in your business, oftentimes doing compliance projects. And so your first projects may be something focused on one of those three things. But if you do these kinds of projects over and over and over again, eventually you achieve this state that your entire organization is much more data aware. And once they're aware that this better data exists and it's available for them to use, they become more data driven and inherently more analytical, and like better strategic decisions start to happen that are based on real immutable data. And I think it's a pattern that we've seen over and over again in some of the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah, so from data awareness to data-driven decisions to like a responsive organization that's built on a data strategy.
That's right. And before long, you even it even infects the boardroom where people start asking questions about where the data came from and are you sure it's clean? And so I think that there've been some great. The former CEO of P&G was a very analytic, kind of integrated analytics into the core of P&G, and that sort of behavior change still exists today in the culture of the organization. And many organizations will come to this reality that the infrastructure that's available for them now to do next gen data management and data ops is relatively inexpensive compared to what it was like to try and do this stuff even 10 or 15 years ago. Where you had vendors previously like Oracle or Teradata or Informatica that tried to charge you outrageous sums of money to do even the simplest of things. Now, with cloud-based, cloud-native solutions like the one we provide from Tamr or products like Data Robot or Data Kitchen, you can actually do a tremendous amount of amazing work at a relatively low cost. And so, I think this is the ultimate result of the, what my friend Christian Chabot used to call the democratization of analytics in the enterprise, that the more democratized analytics became, the more hungry they were for data. And now we have to democratize the access to high quality data in the enterprise. And again, this is at the core of Tamr's mission.
Yeah. So following on to your prior comment about Dayton's rules, or laws. I've had this perspective for many years that there's a rule in enterprise software that whatever's happening in enterprise software is what happened in consumer software 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, and it makes it very easy to work in enterprise software because you just need to go and look at what happened in consumer software 5 years ago and copy it. And very much to your point, the idea that cloud computing and machine learning algorithms that can operate at scale against a highly elastic compute infrastructure on data that's sitting right there in the cloud. Well, those are things that have been true for consumer software in B2C advertising or in consumer websites, in a sense, for plus or minus 5 years. And so all we need to do is copy that approach and apply it to the challenge of data ops in the enterprise.
Very much so, and I think this is exactly what's going on. Is that when we were first starting off at Tamr, we started as an academic project at MIT, and one of the organizations that we connected with as we were doing the academic research were the folks over at Google and their Knowledge Graph team, and it was remarkable the similarities between a lot of what we were building at Tamr and what they had built at Google Knowledge Graph to deliver those simple info boxes that you get in the upper right-hand corner of your Google search results now, these highly curated forms of information. And a lot of what we're doing at Tamr is really aligned with building out the curation infrastructure so that every end user inside of an enterprise can get access to data as simply and easily inside of their enterprise as they do when they go home and they use Google at night. And so, but it's a non-trivial problem, primarily based on what you referred to before, all of these behavioral challenges. And in some ways, the expectations that enterprise consumers have, which is much lower than they have when they go home on the modern internet. There are a lot of people that can probably relate to the idea that oftentimes when they go into work, they're not expecting to have the same kind of information experience that they're used to having on the modern web. And there's really no reason for that disconnect. Quite the opposite. When you look at the amount of money that large enterprise spends on information and information technology, the experience that enterprise consumers have when they come into the office should be as good, if not way better, than what they get on the modern internet. But we've got a big gap to fill and a long way to go. And we really believe that starting with great high quality data is kind of the right beginning of that journey to digital transformation.
Yeah, so this is a really nice idea. This idea that if we can do what Google did for the consumer web, but for enterprise data, for structured data, and give people full access to it, clean it, normalize it, cleanse it, categorize it, make it available for decision making, that would be of tremendous value. And people would have an experience at work which was as good or better than their experience with the consumer web. So I'm sure anyone listening to this is wondering to themselves, sounds good, but how do I get there? And I know you're going to be speaking about DataOps at the DataMasters Summit in October. So maybe give us a quick preview of what people should expect to hear when they attend the DataMasters Summit in October.
You bet. Well, we're going to spend a lot of time talking not only about technology and the 7 major components in any modern best-of-breed open DataOps ecosystem, but we're also going to talk about the personas associated with the next-gen data organization, the consumers, the folks that prepare the data, as well as the data suppliers. And finally, we'll talk about the processes and the methods that you use and you need to put in place in order to do data ops at large scale in a modern enterprise. And so all of these are necessary in order to do data ops really well. And we have some great folks that are real practitioners in the industry that are practicing many of these things, have been for years. Maybe didn't call it data ops initially, but now we're calling it data ops. There's kind of a name now for what they've been doing because it just made sense to them. And we've really tried to focus with DataMasters on delivering a platform for practitioners to talk about what they're doing with real data every day in the modern enterprise. And just like, as you said earlier, myself, I've been a consumer of these kinds of technologies and an implementer of technologies inside of the large enterprise more times than a seller of these things for the last 30 years. And so I'm really excited to listen to all of our colleagues, trusted colleagues and good friends talk about what they're doing to implement modern data ops in these large companies. It's really an exciting time.
So what you're saying is it's not only going to be an inspirational event and summit where people can understand the vision and the strategy, both of Tamr, but of data ops in general, but also relentlessly practical with a real practitioner's view. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's exactly right. And the balance in the enterprise, in order to get stuff done, is like you have to be pragmatic. You can't really afford these big boil the ocean IT projects anymore. The world just doesn't work that way. And history has shown that if you have projects that you scope out that take years to complete, it's likely to fail. Before data mastering at scale, there was master data management in the enterprise. And I think that, big multi-year projects sort of characterize traditional MDM, and almost all those projects failed. I know the ones that I did, failed miserably as we were trying to build the one schema to rule them all. And so the important way to embrace data ops and to start to make the strategic change inside of your company to manage data as an asset is to start with these very pragmatic methods and very, very straightforward projects that are probably measured in weeks and months, not quarters and years.
So I really love this idea of this practical approach and stealing from the concept of DevOps to create these short cycle times and showing people value in days and weeks, not months, quarters, and years. What's one key takeaway that you would expect an attendee for the DataMasters Summit to take away?
A lot of the people that we're bringing together are there to help all of their colleagues at other companies get started on the data ops journey and really begin to manage their data as a strategic asset as the first step in their digital transformation as a company. And so you should walk away from DataMasters with very pragmatic, very practical advice on where to get started, on the things to do, and also probably a few warnings about pitfalls and things to avoid doing. Mistakes that other people have made that they're going to share so that you don't have to make those same mistakes.
Well, Andy, thank you for joining us on DataMasters. Thank you for a fantastic conversation. And I look forward to hearing you at the DataMasters Summit and hearing and seeing everyone who's listening to this podcast joining us at the event.
Thanks, Anthony. I'll look forward to the academic paper on data.